here, and maybe we'll actually get this thing started. Yes, so this is Albie, and Albie is the Wardley mapping cat. She's actually certified in Wardley mapping.
Oh,
Learnwardleymapping.com/certification, I think. I take this very seriously, Simon. And with that, I think we are indeed live. And I hit the button to tweet it out even. So, welcome everyone to another Wardley Mapping stream, another Wardley Mapping Conversations. I am again joined by Simon Wondercheck. Simon, thank you for being here.
thank you for inviting me for a second time.
Excellent. Yeah, and there is a first time to go watch if you've missed out on our first discussion of sustainable business models. There's a link to that in the description below. Today we're going to revisit the same topic again because Simon's been doing some work. He's been exploring this topic more deeply, and I think you mentioned that you've made some progress. Is that right?
Yes, I did. I mean, last time we basically just looked at the different value chains and worked with that. And today I tried to get it into the evolutionary space and to add a little bit more things to talk about. And yeah, that's basically what I brought with me today.
Okay, awesome. I'm going to go ahead and get us set up to see the mirror board here. Um,
Sure.
and okay, looks like we've got that figured out.
Yeah,
Okay,
just copied the first version of it onto the Miro board as well.
awesome. Here we go. Okay, so kind of walk us through. Should we look at the old value chain or should we start with your worthy map
I
here?
think we can start with the new one because it's to some degree just a repetition of the old one, maybe a little bit more compromised, so it's easier to read.
Got it, got it.
So we still have our average Joe consumer, and basically what he wants to do is to wash his clothes at home.
Okay.
So, which kind of leads us to, I mean, I think we had the dishwasher last time, but
Yep.
it's kind of working the same now.
Yeah, planned
Then of
obsolescence
course,
is one of the things that we were discussing last time, and like the problem of not being able to buy something that's going to last, like buy a machine that's going to last.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so we're still in
So
that same kind of general topic.
yeah, it's still the same story, just a different utility product. So yeah, basically, if he wants to wash his clothes at home, currently his option is to buy a washing machine, of course. And for that, we need the delivery, or let's say collecting the washing machine, which is something we won't explore here in too much detail here. So that's why it's just saying delivery. Then, of course, we have the sale of the unit. So somehow a washing machine unit has to be sold to
Yep.
have him buying it. So as you can see already, I was able to manage to just focus this on the end user here and not have the other user in as well, the producer. So with the sale of the unit, the current practice is to have a mass production of units,
Yep.
which kind of is connected with competitive prices. So we might even could make a connection here. If I just talk about it, it
Yeah,
comes
I buy
into
that.
my mind. So yeah, we have the mass production of units. We want to have, or we need to have competitive prices for the sale of the unit, because otherwise the average Joe wouldn't buy it. And of course, we need the demand for a new unit, because if he already has a unit, he doesn't want to buy a new unit. Usually
Yep.
with these kinds of products, you just buy them when you have a failure of your old unit, so it's broken down.
Yep.
So that's why there we have the connection to failure of old unit. And to have the competitive prices and to have the mass production, you need low cost production. So that's basically the story of most of the utility products we have at our home.
Okay.
And let's say the failure of old units is kind of connected to a design for failure, if I'm being a bit devious,
Yeah.
or as we discussed the last time, that's maybe just a byproduct of wanting to have a cheap product, so a cheap production cost.
Yep.
And there, of course, I might make some compromises on the quality side.
I like how this is an explicit activity in this map.
Yeah, I mean,
um,
there are some proven stories about that companies produce things in a way that it's going to fail after, let's say 2 years or something like that. Because of course, that's one of the main stories here. If we just make money out of selling a unit, then we kind of want to have the demand for a new unit. But if I have a product which is not a fashionable product, where I want to buy a new one, or where I can present the consumer with new fancy features, like for example with an iPhone, then I have the problem that it needs to fail for him to get the demand up again.
Yep.
So yeah,
Oof.
that's, I mean, of course you can say that's not really the truth for every product, but there is some, I think, to some truth in it, at least for the part where you need to design it to be cheap and therefore make some compromise on the quality.
Yeah, there's more truth there than I'm comfortable with, if I'm being honest.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah.
It's we have to be careful that we're not going into conspiracy theorist territory.
Well, it really, like, in general, like, this is just our model of the world, right? And it might be wrong. The thing that makes this not a conspiracy theory is the fact that if we find disconfirming evidence, our model will change and we'll update it, right? Yeah. And a note for Tyler's on the call too, my amazing admin. Tyler, that whole section about the value chain and everything, grab that because that was awesome. Thank you. Cool. So, okay.
And, what I brought in today, because I think it helps for the steps which are going to be coming up in a bit, is a little bit more detail and thinking about low-cost production.
Okay.
We explored it to some degree at the last time, but my business partner gave some insights as well to that. So as you can see, there's some connections to the right, and I placed most of or all of the components as of yet into product rental, because it's a kind of standard product rental area for me, at least. However, I placed the next part into the commodity utility area, because it's kind of the current practice or the best practice. And I put some hyphens in there because it doesn't sound really like a good practice or best practice. However, that's the way things are done right now. So in order to have low-cost production, I need cheap new resources, because for the production, I need resources. Hence, we have some attached problems to that, namely, for example, labor exploitation, where, let's say, I let people work in circumstances which might not be that healthy for them. And to some degree, or to even a bigger degree, I have the destruction of the environment attached to that. And I can give you a prominent example here from Germany as well for that. And a lot of the production nowadays is done in the global south. So, for example, in Africa or Asia, which kind of enables the companies to have the labor exploitation, because on the West, like say, for example, in Europe or in the USA, to some degree, we have some protection for labor for people in the workforce.
Yep.
And of course, we need cheap logistics, because otherwise we had a problem when we produce stuff in the global south and have to ship it over to, for example, Germany or the USA.
Yeah.
And last but not least, we have unassigned or ignored environmental costs. So basically things we create as costs for the environment, for the society, for the community, which are not included into the production costs. So to give you an example, which is kind of a stunning story. So the part where I'm living here in Germany is known for the coal industry. So we had a lot of coal industry in the west of Germany. And part of the, let's say, the debt we have from the coal production here in Germany is that just for one area where we had some hard coal produced, we have to pay annually 200 million euros just to sustain the area, because otherwise a lot of shit would go into the water and everything. So it's a kind of cost for eternity, because we have to do it every year. It's not fixable in the way that we can just invest some money and fix it for all good. We have to invest it every year. So this is a lot of cost if you talk about a lengthy time span, which never have been included into the question of how much the company has to pay for the rights to get to the coal or selling the coal.
Right, because they could hide it in the sense
Yeah,
that
let's say
everyone else
not
has to deal with
necessarily
it.
nefarious that they want to hide it, but nobody talked about it, at least in the past, about that. And of course, there are other examples where we have a bigger discussion right now here in Germany, because we have a new Tesla factory coming up here in the east of Germany, and there's some discussion about if they use up too much water to make some damage in the area around it, which seemingly is fine. But those are the kind of things we nowadays talk a little bit more, but haven't been talked about in the past.
That past context, it's almost like laundering the costs. Like in the United States, you hear stories all the time about how, an industry actor does something, and
Yeah.
because there's no check early in the process, like something will play out for decades, and then the true costs become known, whether it's like pollutants in the water causing cancer rates to spike. Like the
Yeah.
lag time is so
Yeah.
long, and the cycle never gets completed, that basically those costs are laundered throughout the consequences that are basically enacted or inflicted on the rest of society, and nobody's holding those companies to account except through these slow, potentially like regulatory cycles that happen decades
Yeah.
later.
Yeah. And there are the other examples, like, for example, the oil spilling in the Mexican Gulf a couple of years ago with BP. Now, those
Yep.
are, I mean, they had to pay money for that, so that's at least acknowledged. But of course, this happens all the time, to some degree, at least in our other areas, and yeah, kind of invisible, as you wrote here, or not factored in. And this is one of the main arguments about a lot of which people make, who say, okay, renewable energies are actually quite cheaper than the fossil fuels, because the fossil fuels don't factor in the real cost of them. And of course, if we talk about the climate change right now, we have the story about CO2, which is, let's say, affecting us more and more. And this is a byproduct of the production we had in the last century. And
Yep.
yeah, it wasn't factored in the prices.
That's really an
So
interesting point,
yeah.
because one of the things Simon talks about with computing as an example is that
Mhm.
ownership of a data center is rarely understood in terms of its full cost. It's like people think about building a data center in order to make compute cheap, but
Yeah.
what they don't factor into it is the cost of power. Now, but that's a situation where those consequences do catch up to you.
Yeah.
But you try to launder them again, like through like, oh, we didn't expect this, or it was
Mhm.
just a particularly strange year, or something like that. Um,
Yeah.
so you do have those consequences, but here it seems like making those costs visible and conspicuous happens after the fact, and like maybe relatively speaking, you're lucky in Germany that at least you're having those conversations up front where like, well, if you do this, it's going to have
Mhm.
this cost.
Yeah. And I mean, in the in I think if you look at business studies or economic studies, I think oftentimes it's called external costs, because it's something external to the company. So this is a kind of a euphemism, because it shouldn't be external for the company that you're producing those costs for your community. It should be something which is need to be factored in, as you wrote it
Yeah.
here. So yeah.
Jesper
Hmm?
mentioned something in the chat real quick. Just like, should these unknown, unseen costs be more towards Genesis? And I think the answer to that is yes. But what you're pointing out is the best practices of ignoring, of not assigning those
Yes,
costs.
of course. Yeah, if you look at from the evolution point, I would agree that it should be more on the left side, and then there we have an evolution over there. I will get to that in just a minute.
Excellent.
Um, Here it's currently like, okay, I can ignore it. So the best practice is not to talk about it, just ignore it, not to make any studies about what kind of environmental impact I would create, and try to factor it in. The best practice for the business is, if there is no regulator, just ignore it. So that would be my argument, but you can argue from the other
Yeah.
side as well.
Okay.
So I will just copy over a different map. Just a sec. So yeah, what I was able to do is try to make a map which contains the old model as well as a new one. And
Whew.
if we look at the bottom left of the map, you can see I've put in two, let's say, evolutionary things which will probably happen. So one of which is the integration of CO2 costs, which we actually have here in Europe. We just looked it up. For example, the cheapest cost you can get right now for 1 ton of CO2 in Germany is about 25 euros. In Sweden, it's above 100 euros. So it's also depending on the country right now. But this is an integration of CO2 costs into the market price. And currently, I would say it's in the custom area, because we have some countries which adopt that. But I guess, I'm not sure. For example, in the US, it doesn't exist, and in China, I think it doesn't exist as well, or in Asia. However, it's getting there. And for example, the European Union is discussing about a CO2 tax for imported products, which kind of makes the production here more competitive, even with the CO2 prices, compared to the production in, for example, Asia or in America, because then they have to pay the CO2 price as well. So
That makes
it's
sense.
getting there, that this is going to be included into the production costs.
No, that's really interesting because there's this idea of creating kind of other worlds of how rules work differently, and if
Yeah.
Germany is able to kind of in a weird way suspend unfettered capitalism for a moment by creating these interesting constraints, it creates a bubble where the rules work differently, and
Yeah.
so internally you have competition going on and behaving in a certain way, but you factor in the external realities of other countries not having to play by those rules.
Yeah.
You create a regulatory environment where you can kind of basically create a fair game to play, which
Yeah.
is interesting, but you certainly not let it be, right? It's certainly a heavy-handed approach, but that creates a different kind of world.
Definitely. And if you have a, let's say, that's one of the good things about the European Union, is that it's a big market. So Germany would
Yeah.
be a big market as well, but the European Union itself is one of the biggest markets as a whole in the whole wide world. So there's, if they are able to put this kind of CO2 tax for imported products in, which creates a lot of issues. For example, how do I make a certificate about how much CO2 I used up for this product? Now it's kind of hard to prove,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's could have a really interesting effect. So this gets me to that integration of CO2 costs is not something which is in the Genesis area. It's something which is in the custom area, or let's say the emerging market here. So I think this is going to be factored in more and more. And of course, the climate change and the effects we have from that will put in even more pressure onto that. And yeah, the international agreements as well.
Yeah, Tyler, real quick, I just want to make a note. Grab that whole section from the explanation of integration of CO2 costs up through the European Union. Like that discussion alone just isn't being had enough, I think, especially because we could actively create a world, right? We could make these decisions,
Yep.
and we're not. So I don't
It's
know.
kind of what I find most interesting about it. It still factors in capitalism. So currently, what's basically done is we are trying to reduce the amount of CO2 which is produced. So the prices of the CO2 certificates are getting expensive more and more. And of course, if you are able to reduce your CO2 output, you have an advantage because you don't have to buy them up. And if the prices go up, then you're screwed in the long run if you're not able to
Yeah.
reduce the costs or factor it into your products costs. So the other movement down there is the integration of the environmental costs. You can see with the sticky note, this was the example I brought in with the rural area here in Germany, which is when I read about the stories, it's really crazy. I mean, it's really, really crazy if you think about it. We are paying 200 million euros just for one area in Germany, just to sustain this area for not polluting the water around it and everything
Wow.
every year. Nobody talked about this cost really in the end. I mean, so yeah, I would expect that we have this kind of evolutionary movement to from the generous and custom part to, let's say, the growing market or even the mature market here. But of course, what we can see is that we have inertia for that movement, and those are the lobby interests of the, I call it the old industry. Don't necessarily are just old companies, but let's say the old way of doing things. So this is kind of, yeah, the problem right now, that it's kind of hard to get that into the main market because there's some interest against that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
So working up from the bottom, let's say if we have to integrate the costs of CO2 and the environmental cost into the production of things, then of course, as you can see from here, the integration of CO2 costs, we have this kind of connection to the low cost production. Because if I mass produce stuff, I mass produce CO2. And hence my costs for productions are getting up. Hence my prices are going to get up, or at least my costs are getting up. So either I have to reduce the margin I have, or I have to raise the prices, which puts me into the pressure that I'm not able to provide people with competitive prices, because now I have to factor in more costs. So what would be the alternative? So if I don't want to produce massive amounts of products of units, then okay, I want to have the minimal production of units, which kind of needs the production of long lifetime products. However you achieve that. So of course we have designed for long lifetime. So I would assume and I know that. I mean, even if you look at some things like lamps for is it lamps, the light,
yeah, exactly,
light bulbs.
Yep.
So if you look at those things, if you have an if you look at the street signs, the street lights, there you have light bulbs in them which really last a long time, because it's a pain in the ass to remove that and change them out. So we are able to produce things for with a long lifetime. And the same goes, for example, if you talk about the hardware which we have in servers and the hardware we have in consumer products.
Yep.
So we are able to produce those things in a different way if we want to.
I had
Of
an
course, they have
experience just like this right now, where I had to replace the headlamps on my car, on my vehicle, and actually it involved a run-in with the police, which was not fun. But they said, replace your headlamps. I'm like, okay, fine. I go to the store, and of course there are these mass-produced light bulbs, and I'm trying to figure out which one is going to last the longest, because I know I have to do this like every year or two. And there's a much more expensive option, like $100 for a pair of fog lamps that are made with LEDs, which are going to last for at least 5 years. And so I was able to make that decision, make that trade-off. It was like, oh, at least I'll get 5 years out of this, and that's guaranteed. But it costs more up front. But if I go to my dealer, my auto dealer, basically they do the service for my car, and I ask them to replace these light bulbs, they're not really going to give me that choice. They're going to replace it with whatever they have off the shelf. But because I did it myself, like I had to do a more custom activity in order to get to the point where I could make the decision that was more sustainable. So it just reminded me of that, just because you used the light bulb example in particular.
Yeah, but I think the key takeaway is here that we are able to design things in a way that they have a longer lifetime.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, if we look at the B2B products, like for example, commercial washing machines or industrial washing machines, they have to have a longer runtime because they are used more heavily than the normal consumer products.
We're clearly capable.
We are capable, yeah. So we have to design for a long lifetime, so that we have a long lifetime production of units, and because we want to have minimal production of units. And again, okay, if I that was the discussion we had last time. If I think about it from the company perspective, I'm kind of screwed if my only income is the sale of a unit, and
right.
I produce less of them, then I make less revenue, and I need the revenue each year. So this is getting me into a kind of fickle. So what we talked about last time was this kind of as a service thinking. So I'm paying a monthly fee for the washing machine. In this case, it's kind of a leasing model, but it's a bit different, and I'll probably get into that. Yeah, and the key here is the low monthly fee, because as I was mentioning before, my business partner, funnily enough, or not funny for him, had his washing machine
Oh no.
broken down. So he had the same challenge I had a couple of months ago to look up for a new washing machine. And since we had the discussion, he actually found the company which has the option to rent a washing machine. And so we looked at it commercially, because it was kind of interesting. Okay, they have this kind of idea in the business model. Oh, that's really interesting. And yeah, what we found out, they wanted him to pay 14 euros per month. And of course, he made the calculation, or we made the calculation. Officially, the product is listed with 800 euros. So if I divide that by the 14 euros per month, then I get to 57 a month. So that's not even 5 years, which I expect, okay, that might be the lifetime they currently expect from this machine. However, the real sale price, if you looked it up on different stores, was 400 euros, so half of that.
Oh yeah. Yep.
So it was 29 months as a runtime. So, I mean, in his decision, he had to think about, okay, do I expect that this machine will last more than 29 months? Yeah, probably. So he decided to buy it instead of renting it. So the prices are too high in that case. For whatever reason, we weren't able to figure it out yet. But just put another sticky note here next to it. Let's say if I expect a lifetime of 10 years, which isn't that crazy. Then I would divide the 400 euros by 10 years. I would have 40 euros per year, and this would lead me to 3.3 euros per month. I would expect that in the 400 euros, they still have a margin in there. So there, technically, there would be a lot of room for a nice price. And if I talk to you and say, okay, you have to just pay 3 euros, or I don't know, $4 a month for a washing machine, you will probably join in.
Yeah.
So
It's less than I pay for Netflix.
yeah. Yeah, I don't know what you use more often, but
It's a good question. Well, this gets into an interesting territory though, which is the problem that I don't think there's at least like right now with what we know, that there's like a very simple path forward through this of like natural capitalist behaviors of supply and demand competition, pushing something into the right towards commodity, because we already have a stable commodity like
yeah,
situation right now where like or rather a best practice of just buying another washing machine
yeah.
at a medium price and just kind of going with that every couple of years having to buy another one kind of model. There's a particularly difficult problem for a company that's trying to do this sort of rental leasing sort of model, which is in order for them to get the kind of profit that they need in order to survive in a capitalist kind of framing of this, they need to charge enough to offset all the risk of putting these machines in people's homes and trusting that they won't break them and trusting that it won't be abused and all that stuff. And plus the fact that they just have to basically play this out over time in order for it to pay off, right? It has to be played out over years.
Yeah.
And then you've got the problem that people don't value washing machines in the way that they value Netflix, right?
Yeah.
It's supposed to
I
just be a
guess
thing that just works, and so they don't. It's
Mhm.
like Facebook for the people who like to use Facebook. It's like, well, I just use Facebook. They don't see the actual cost of operating Facebook and having good content moderation and making good decisions about disinformation and all that fun stuff. They don't see that. It's invisible to them. They don't see the maintenance or the work that goes into making something that is long-term lasting, and so they don't value it right now.
But I think it's still an if they are able to put the price at the let's say really attractive low end, then I think it would get people into thinking, because as we can see, I mean, for example, we have a couple of examples where we evolutionized from a sale business model to a leasing or as a service model. I think the computer industry is full of it. Let's say, for example, software. I mean, you probably remember at some point we got into a store and bought a package with the software Windows, I don't know,
Yes. Yep.
59 or whatever it was then back in the day,
AOL
which we
Online
don't
mailed a
do
disc to
anymore.
you.
Or Office would be the best example because it's really recent now. They changed, and there was some kind of critic to that as well, to a
Yep.
monthly subscription model. But of course, making that more sense in that way that they can update it more regularly and don't have to wait for, let's say, a couple of new features and then release a new version for people to buy it.
Video games too.
And
Yep.
video games too. Cars are the same to some degree with a leasing model. Again, this is a little bit more difficult because I think they did that to drive demand for their product and not necessarily want to reduce the amount of cars produced.
Yeah,
It's the
Jesper
other
was
way
mentioning
around.
cars and glasses and bikes as well in the chat,
Yeah.
pointing that out. Yep. So
Yeah.
clearly this sort of thing is possible. But what about
Yeah,
the
and
scale?
yeah, and I think, I mean, it's a bold move. I can imagine that, but I think you could have a first mover advantage here because it's taking, and I think we discussed it last time already. It will take a company some time to transition from a mass production scheme to a high quality scheme. And therefore, if other competitors want to follow up, they have a lot of trouble doing that because they don't know how to do that, and they have a transition time there. So I think you should be able, with some kind of investment, to get a really big market share for that. I mean, if Jeff Bezos thinks, okay, I want to get into washing machines with this kind of subscription model, I think he will be able to do that. So, and in the long run, he would make money over it. At least I would imagine that.
That's an interesting thing. So what's in my mind about the scale problem is something that like um, you know basically where in order to win, in order to play the game of volume operations where the cost per unit has this pressure to go low, 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 down, 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 you have
Yeah.
to be operating at a sufficient scale to get the volume that you need in order, like at a lower margin, in order to like basically succeed. You just need a lot of customers, a lot of
Yeah.
scale.
Yeah.
Simultaneously, you've got the problem of how to subvert the existing stability. And I think, to your point, if Jeff Bezos wants to do that, he probably could because he's already got the existing kind of landing pad of the existing like beachhead in all of
Mhm.
our homes of Amazon delivery and so on and so forth. And they're already doing all sorts of like kind of
Yeah.
interesting things that they could use as a you already do this, you already pay for Prime. What if if you got the Prime add-on
Mhm.
that came with a leasing model for all of your
Yeah.
equipment needs?
Yeah.
Weird stuff
And I
like that.
think you could see it in the development of companies like Amazon, but also Netflix as well, where they had a long time where they didn't make any money or had a margin, but in the end it paid out, and they were able to get a huge chunk of the market, and other companies had trouble following up or even were put out of business. So I
Hmm.
think despite the troubles that movement still entails, I think there is at least the risk for current companies to think about, okay, what would happen if somebody else would make that move? And so I think it's something they should take seriously, because in the end, I mean, this is the one factor where I would say, okay, financially speaking, from the point of view of the consumer, there might be a business which is able to give them a more attractive renting model instead of selling a unit model. But on the other hand, if we again look back at the bottom of the map, we can see that there are some movements in where the classical production is going to get more expensive, and hence the competitive prices will be hard to keep, especially if somebody else makes a different business model.
Ooh.
So yeah,
Okay.
so
Yeah.
that's why I put in, or my business partner Thomas was calling it the risk box. So the best practices of the past is actually the risk box, because if those things are going to change for whatever reason, you kind of get screwed.
There's something interesting happening in the well, kind of horrifying actually happening in the United States right now, where we passed legislation to for a very extended period of time suspend evictions because so many people are living month to month,
Yeah.
that a lot of people are renting, and so they suspended evictions to basically keep the economy from collapsing. Like if you have a bunch of homeless folks out of
Mhm.
nowhere, well, that's a lot fewer people able to spend money and things like that in the economy, which would just destroy the GDP and all that fun stuff. But the thing that's wild about that is that the mechanism hasn't performed the way that it's supposed to, in the sense that they suspended evictions, but then they haven't figured out how to actually make the system work so that landlords are not then getting hit by banks and being foreclosed on
Mhm.
and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So something has
It's a trickle-down
misfired.
economy, isn't it?
Well, supposedly there was a mechanism,
A little
right?
bit different than they
So
talk about,
broken.
but to some degree it's
So,
kind of connected.
but this creates a moment, right?
Yeah.
A moment of extreme financial pressure. And if you are running a business as landlords are, right?
Yeah.
You are running the business of letting people live in your property, in your homes. Suddenly your risk profile has shot through the roof because you're way more uncertain around how things are working. You're not able to evict people.
Mhm.
You might not be getting the revenue that you need. And
Yeah.
you're probably under financial pressure as well. I mean, boohoo,
Yeah.
landlords, whatever, landowning class. Um, what you're experiencing right now creates a moment in the market, which is landlords super not interested in spending a lot of money on appliances right now. So I mean, that's an interesting kind of thing because I think that moment is going to have a memory for the
Yeah.
next several years of landlords feeling that financial pressure and feeling much more conservative about what they're willing to spend. So if they are responsible for the washer and dryer of an apartment unit, um, and it breaks, or they have to
Mhm.
replace it, or they go and they're renovating an apartment and they want to keep their costs down, well, that's interesting. Maybe they would choose to go with the more reliable business model of going with a vendor for the appliances
Yeah.
rather than taking on that risk of that transaction themselves and going with a low cost unit that's going to fail in a couple of years.
Yeah.
So suddenly this looks like an interesting space to play in
Yeah.
over the next couple of years. Is there
Yeah,
a
definitely.
similar dynamic in the EU, or are there
Mm,
other moments like it that are coming up
no,
that
I think here it's more. I mean, usually we don't have the here in this case the households have themselves the washing machines and dryers. So which if we talk about it from an environmental perspective is kind of stupid because every time every household has to buy one instead of using one which is in the building.
at it? Yep.
But yeah, that's why it's more in that direction. But yeah, I mean, I think here we have, um, let's say, a better social system than in the US. It's not a perfect one, but definitely better than in the US.
I
And
saw those
we,
eyebrows. You're like, we
yeah,
know we know how bad it is, but yeah.
yeah. Don't get me started with the health system. But I think here we have more present the questions about the environment, and therefore, and again, we have this kind of vehicle like the CO2 costs included here, which kind of drives this development. At least I'm sure about that. But for me, the fun about the story here is it's not about the moral question about let's say we have to do things in a way that our children can live happily in this world. I mean, this would be an important point enough, don't get me wrong, but I think we have some capitalist drivers here which are going to take place. And that's my argument again for every company. It's not about you doing the right thing, it's about doing the thing which keeps you in business. Because
Mm-hmm.
I think the more stress we have from the climate crisis, the more pressure will be put on things like integrating the CO2 costs into production, and this will change our ways of production and value chain.
It requires some forward thinking, and I worry that sometimes the efforts to bring those costs front and center often get kind of dismissed, or at least we would rather many of the folks dealing with the existing regime, the best practices of the past, would rather they get dismissed. What in your mind is, thinking about this whole system here, uh, where do you start? Like, where do you pay attention to and put your efforts towards enabling the disruption of the old best practices and start paving the way towards the future? Or is that place not on the map?
Well, at least one point on the map we identified is down below, where the lobby interests of, again, I call it the old industry, not necessarily old industry, is taking place. So if I'm able to remove that inertia, then I would get an advantage if I'm more prepared for the change which will come from that. So I could speed up the process in that way.
Okay.
I think it's a steam truck which was going to happen either way, but yeah, I could speed it up
What sort of
if I do the
things?
right lobby.
Yeah, that makes sense. What sort of things are hidden underneath there that are supporting that existing lobbyist kind of environment?
Mm, I think to some degree it's um, the the sunk cost of the investments. So if I have a production in place which is specialized for one thing, I'm hesitant to change that. So it's a typical inertia thing. My old business model is running fine. Why should I change it? Or when I change it, I will cannibalize my old business model. So the same problem we have, for example, with the production of electrical vehicles. No?
Yeah.
The car makers were hesitant to do the change. Tesla came along, and now the regulators are forcing them to do that. So yeah, that's a change is going to happen. And the companies which were prepared for that now have an advantage, like for example Tesla.
Yeah.
So I think on the regulator side, you have an angle, but also I think from the consumer perspective, because as was mentioned here in this business model, I could make a move regarding the financial aspects here, that I don't have to put in too much money into the machine by buying it, but by just renting it. I have the transfer of the risk not anymore. So again, I don't have to guarantee, or if I buy a product, it's my risk if it's going to run for a long time or not. But if I rent it and in a way that the rentee or the company here tells me, okay, if it's breaking down, I either repair it or replace it. So in that case, I wouldn't have to think about that.
Hmm.
So
Yep.
one thing, for example, I would really like for those utility products, because I hated to buy them and to think about if
Yeah.
they are going to last for, I don't know, 2 years, 5 years, or whatever. So I don't want to have this risk placed on me. But also you could argue that from the environmental perspective, and you see that to some degree with at least a part of the population which is thinking about, okay, how do I consume products, how often do I buy products, and there's at least a partial market already there for people who want to buy products which last a long time or are good to repair. So if you drive that up for whatever kind of story you're telling or marketing you're doing, this might also give you an edge in the market as a business.
Yeah. With the sunk costs and the risk displacement questions, there are a lot of options, right? There's options for doing user education. There's options for literally changing, what is profitable, what is not profitable, accelerating the cost of the investments that have already been made by levying fines and things like that. What are the menu of options you think in your head to start, like, just taking the first steps towards these kinds of discussions?
Mm, I think it's to show people that it is inevitable, or at least convince them that it's inevitable, because I mean, uh, just in Europe we had two stories this summer. So we had the flooding here in Germany and other parts of Western Europe, and we have the big fires running wild in the Mediterranean area.
Yep.
And this gets media attention, and of course now that gets people thinking about we have to change. The Green Party here in Germany, last election cycle they had around I think 7 or 8%, and now they're around 18%, so they more than doubled that. At some point they were the biggest party here in Germany when people asked what they would vote. So it's getting there. And I think the more stress we have on the global system in that regard, the more regulators will be forced to do anything. And even some company, I think one of the brighter people here, in Germany, Maya Göpel, she was telling that there was a survey around business leaders, and they were asked, what are the biggest risks for your business? And so on an existential level. And I think out of the biggest 5 points, 4 were environmental related. The other one was nuclear war. So that's the kind of scale we're talking here. So even the economy understands that it has to change something here.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And one thing which was kind of interesting to think about, if we have this kind of CO2 tax here in Europe, with products coming from other areas of the world, and if we have a change here in the value chain, it might become again more attractive to build those products here in the Western world instead of just putting it out into the global south. So this could also be an argument for politicians to say, okay, we are bringing the jobs back. Yeah?
That's a good one. One that I'm familiar with over here as well.
Yeah,
Where'd the jobs go?
Yeah, they're doing that from another perspective. So, but yeah,
That makes a lot of sense.
Just one last thing I want to point out, which was interesting. I think last time I mentioned the story about Philips in somewhere in the Netherlands, where they had the terminal where they provided light, and they, in the end, they specifically decided to provide light and not the working light bulbs, because light includes the energy cost. So they pay the fee, but the energy costs have to be included into that. And that makes totally sense. If I again think about the washing machine, then this washing machine as a service at home needs to, or ideally would include, the energy and water costs as well. Because if I don't include that into the calculation here, then as a designer and producer of the washing machine, I wouldn't have that much of an interest to make them energy and water cost efficient.
And that's like just a version of systems thinking, like thinking more globally about not just your part, but how your part integrates into other parts. And the more we can encourage people to take on a larger scope of that, like how you're not just responsible for the part, but you're responsible for the energy cost that is implied by that part.
Yeah.
That's a tough thing to do, but maybe it's an alternative way of looking at the way that business functions.
Yeah, you know what's interesting, and again, Thomas was pointing that out in our discussion beforehand. He said it feels like you are getting to the basic needs. So my need isn't to have a car. My need is to have mobility. So my basic need is to pay for mobility. So to get from one point to the other point, and not for having a car or even a rental car. So that's where it differs from the leasing model. The leasing model is designed to circumvent the high financial investment of putting a lot of money into a new car. So I'm just paying a monthly fee, and then I get a new great car, and after 3 years or something like that, I can exchange the car. So it's kind of created to drive demand for new cars, so they can produce more cars. But if I really think about it as a service, then it's more like mobility as a service and not cars as a service.
Yep.
And that's really requires you to think about differently about things, and this leads to more interesting models.
That is
And
interesting. I'm already thinking about like
yeah,
washed clothes as a service, as a like.
yeah, we were talking about that. So, for example, I live in a bigger housing complex. So we have around 250 units. So why couldn't there be a service here where I just put out my dirty clothes with a label on it, and then somebody picks it up and gets it washed and back dry here in front of my flat. And since we have a lot of tenants here, the cost would be shared of the personnel and of course the washing machine as well. And then we don't have to produce that much of washing machines to get our clothes clean. So
That's
yeah,
brilliant.
if you go into the basic needs, you could imagine different business models from that point on.
And it's also like such a clear way of transitioning from the old model to the new model. Old
Yeah,
model is those apartment complexes are like selling the feature of, oh, you have your own in-unit washer and dryer instead of a
yeah,
communal one. Well, what if you sell instead a service? And like
yeah,
this comes with it. You can like we don't provide a washer and dryer in the unit. However, what we do provide is a service that, and it enables you to get what you need.
yeah,
And that it's the jobs to be done style view of the situation, right? It's like the classic example, nobody wants a power drill, they want a hole in the wall. Nobody really
mm,
wants a washer and dryer deeply
yeah,
intrinsically. What they want is clean clothes, and that's a perfect way of basically bundling that service with the trade-off that you don't have an in-unit washer and dryer with this longer, like we have washers and dryers that last for decades because
yeah,
we decided to
yeah.
invest in that.
That's right.
That's absolutely brilliant. I don't know if you can hear on Zoom, but the folks on the stream can probably hear. I have a siren going off in my basement because there's water in it because it's been raining and flooding
So
here, so it feels a little timely.
I thought a washing machine was broken down.
That's the other thing that can happen here. Yes, we also have copper pipes in
Mhm.
this unit that are very old and they're corroded, and the investment to switch to something that is going to last longer or at least be more
Mhm.
easily replaceable or something along those lines. It's those trade-offs of risks. It's just harder to have those conversations until the consequences hit you in the face.
Yeah,
So, with that, I think we have to wrap up here because I have to go turn that alarm off.
yeah,
But
sure.
Simon, I want to really thank you so much for bringing these ideas to us. Um, if is there anything that you're starting lately, or anything that you're doing that you'd like to invite people to engage with you further? Like, where can people find you on Twitter? Do you have any podcasts? Um,
Yeah, Twitter would be the first one, and otherwise, of course, I have my own company. So yeah, if you look me up, you will find my company as well. Um, and yeah, I was mentioned before that we are thinking about creating another podcast where we talk with people who are trying to get their business models sustainable. And yeah, I hope that we will find the time to get more deeply into that and find the time for get the podcast up and running,
awesome.
because I think there are a lot of constructive and great stories out there, and we just have to hear about them.
Okay, so I imagine you'll be tweeting about that. Simon's Twitter profile is in the description of this video. Go follow him. Pay attention to the kinds of stuff that he's going to be putting out in the next few years. I'm just so excited for the kinds of things that you're imagining, and this is the thing that makes this all worth it, right? Like using Wardley mapping to make some company more
Yeah,
profitable. Who cares, right? Like, but being able to see the edge of how we can use capitalism to maybe create a better world. Not that capitalism itself is creating that better world, but that we can use it to create something
yeah.
better is, I think, what makes Wardley mapping worth it. Being
Yeah,
able to see those leverage
that's also
points.
what drives us in our company. So we don't just want to consult people to just get them more profit. I mean, it's nice to have more profit, don't get me wrong, but it would be nice if there would be let's say a bigger purpose behind it, a bigger sense behind it. And it doesn't have to be environmental, but to some degree get the feeling that it's helping society in one way or another. Yeah, so it could be an improved product which, let's say, saves money, saves energy costs, whatever, but some kind of purpose would be nice.
Just give me any purpose, just anything more purposeful than just
Yeah,
profit, please.
and yeah, and sometimes even companies had a great purpose and forgot about it. And part of our job to some degree is sometimes to remind them of their purpose. So.
We all need that reminder sometimes, and I'm glad that people like you are doing that. Thanks
Thank you very
everyone
much.
for joining us today and for coming along with us on this journey through
Yeah, thanks for
sustainable
having me
business
again.
models. I'm really so grateful that you came on the show, Simon. And follow him on Twitter. And until next time, go make some maps, go learn some things.
Yeah,
You'll be
it's
surprised what you
nice.
find.